Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, John from MS Piss. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 9th of October 2024. Let's start with the news that the Ramstein meeting has been postponed. It was due to take place on the 12th of October, just a few days' time, and it's due to take place with heads of state. Joe Biden was due to turn up to represent the US. I initially heard that Joe Biden had cancelled, and I wonder whether the postponement of the meeting is because Joe Biden had cancelled, which itself is probably, this is my speculation, I don't know at all, but it's obviously major campaign season in the US, and he will be utilised by the Harris-Walz ticket to campaign in certain places and do certain things, and it could be that there was a clash with the calendar there. And so the Ramstein meetings had to be rescheduled. Obviously, that's going to be an important one because it's with heads of state. There have been a number of meetings fairly recently, and I was quite surprised it was so hot on the heels of a previous one. But we'll see. We'll see whether that was as a result of the US election or there was some other reason for that reschedule, or we just don't know when it will be at the moment. Okay. According to Euronews, Hungary has blocked the 35 billion euro promised by the European Union to Ukraine. That 35 billion euro package, that was a loan, I believe, underwritten by the frozen Russian assets. The loan will not be unlocked until the next president of the United States is elected. This is Viktor Orban being very I assume, very pro-Trump, assuming he's hoping, and in fact, he said it very publicly. He's endorsed again Trump for the presidency, and he said some really overtly pro-Trump stuff, which is interesting as a head of state. You don't usually publicly endorse one side or the other, but he's done that, and he's now saying, well, I'm going to hold this up until after the election. I think this is really terrible politics, and this is why the Europeans are scrabbling to find a way around this. As Flash News says, Hungary blocks a $50 billion loan, so 35 billion euros, loan to Ukraine until after US elections, according to Reuters. Here, Budapest also postponed a decision to extend EU sanctions against Russia. Quote, we believe that the issue of extending Russian sanctions should be decided after the US elections. We have to see in which direction the future US administration will move. I don't know why he's saying that. That's the Hungarian finance minister. Why would you say that? Like, what's it got to do with the US? What the EU does with frozen Russian assets with regard to supporting Ukraine? It's, as someone says here, EU is paralysed as long as it allows Hungary to veto everything. It's just absolutely terrible. I'm so sick and tired of Viktor Orban. And the fact that he is the, object of Trump's adulation is just so worrying. Right, going back to German aid to Ukraine. I spoke to him yesterday on my live stream. Please check that out. It was a really interesting chat, as it always is. He says, great news. In an interview with R&D Major General Christian Freuding, apparently it is the case that Germany has delivered last week an RST SLMs, that's a medium range fire unit, along with two RST SLS launchers. The RST SLM fire unit was co-financed by Norway via the German Immediate Action on Air Defence Initiative, or IAADI. Freuding is head of the planning and command staff and head of Situation Centre Ukraine in the German MOD, one of the highest ranking Germans when it comes to German military assistance to Ukraine. So that's really good news there, that more air defences have found their way to Ukraine. So moving on to France now, during October and November, the French army will be training, or is training, 2,300 Ukrainian soldiers in eastern France. In fact, we've just heard that Emmanuel Macron is going to visit that base. It's unknown where that base is, as in it's not public knowledge. You'll probably find out where it is if you really tried. But Emmanuel Macron's going to visit that base to see how the Ukrainians are getting on. It's part of the Ukrainian 155th Brigade. On completion, France will transfer to Ukraine full associated equipment for the brigade, including 128 armoured vehicles, so things like the VAB, which is becoming obsolete. They are phasing that out. They've already received a number of those. So 128 armoured vehicles, 18 Caesar howitzers, 18 AMX 10RC, those are the light tanks on the 6 wheels. There was also the rumour from French aid to Ukraine who suggested, and take this with a pinch of salt, may or may not happen, but there is precedent for things disappearing off official lists of equipment for France, like inventories, and then after disappearing off the list, you end up seeing them in Ukraine. You're like, oh, that's where that went. There have apparently been, I forget now, is it something like 30 Leclerc tanks have disappeared off a list? And there is speculation, but again, pinch of salt, that Ukraine could be receiving from France some main battle tanks for this unit as well. And that would be amazing. So the Leclerc battle tanks, similar to sort of Challengers and Abrams and whatnot, they're the French main battle tank. That would be very interesting if that is going to happen as well. Now, talking of France, Sébastien Lecornu and others have been meeting concerning the SAMP-T and the new version of SAMP-T, which I think is the SAMP-T NG. That's just passed its first test in shooting down. I think the desire is it gets to shoot down ballistic missiles, that it is basically the best air defense system in the world. So at the moment, there's this worry from French and Italians here that the European air defense system or network is going to be employing essentially Patriots. So on a Sunday, Tuesday morning at Missile Testing Centre facing the Atlantic Ocean, France and Italy's plan to build a rival to a German and American air defense effort cleared its first major hurdle. So the Aster-30 B1NT missile was fired for the first time from a launching pad and destroyed a target to applause from engineers and onlookers. Okay, first step of the programme, that is absolutely key to our strategic autonomy, says Sébastien Lecornu. So remember, the military strategy coming out, or the military industrial strategy coming out of the EU is suggesting or stipulating that 60% of all procurements need to come from within Europe. And so buying things like Patriots is against the industrial military strategy of the EU. So the EU needs to be able to have a viable alternative. Our air defense has become one of Europe's most pressing priorities since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kiev and other Ukrainian cities are regularly pummeled with Russian missiles and drones. Earlier this year, Greece and Poland called for a European air defense shield, an idea backed by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In the past decade, France and Italy jointly developed the medium-range ground-to-air or ground system, SAMP-T, a European-made air defense system that can intercept ballistic missiles, drones, fighter jets, and other targets. However, many European countries are buying the rival American-made Patriot air defense system. Politically, Paris and Rome also want to compete with Berlin, which is leading the European Sky Shield initiative that aims to jointly procure Patriots, its own Iris-T, and Israel's Arrow 3 system to provide a multi-layered defense. Faced with lackluster customer interest, both countries are accelerating, that's France and Italy, the development of an update to their system, the SAMP-T new generation, SAMP-T NG. According to Eurosam, the joint venture will be between MBDA and Thales. The SAMP-T NG will detect targets more than 350 kilometers away and intercept them beyond 150 kilometers. So this is a much longer range system as well. So they're going for a longer range than the Patriot, and obviously they're going to be working on the ability to take down ballistic missiles. Now, this will, I think, Lecornu told reporters that a major benefit of the SAMP-T system is that it can strike targets across a 360-degree range, a feat which would require multiple Patriot fire units. So that's one of the advantages over the existing Patriot systems. Nations that are not Patriot clients, such as Belgium, could be interested in the SAMP-T NG. French officials said that some European countries are looking to buy the system but declined to name them. So yeah, France and Italy really keen on pushing these. Lucornu said the Italian counterpart Crocetta he and his counterpart have been pushing to create a rival to Germany's European Sky Shield initiative since April. Their joint effort will be helped by Lucornu's reappointment to Prime Minister Michel Barnier's cabinet. So Lucornu, the defence minister, is quite integral to a lot of these moves, and France supporting Ukraine in the way that they have. I know some people say they could do a lot more, but Lucornu, I think, has done a pretty good job. In mid-September in Rome, both Lucornu and Crocetta announced their countries would buy SAMP-T NG systems. France will get 12 overall, including 8 that they've already ordered, so another 4, and Italy will have 10. The systems are aimed to be arriving in 2026 from there onwards. French Navy is also expected to be equipped with the Astor B-1 NT missiles in 26 or 27. And that gives you a little understanding of the need for Ukraine. They obviously need something like this, the ability to fire at targets at greater distances than they already have. They only have the Patriot really in the SAMP-T that can hit ballistic missiles, and we're not really sure how good what either are at taking out ballistic missiles. We don't have the raw data. I mean, we're under the assumption that both systems do a pretty good job. My thoughts is probably the Patriot does a better job than the SAMP-T, although there are claims that SAMP-T can take down ballistic missiles. Then that brings me on to this, the RIM 174 Standard ERAM. What the heck is that? Okay, so it's a missile in current production for the US Navy. It's designed for extended range anti-air warfare. So in other words, ER, extended range anti-air warfare, AAW. This is shooting down planes and helicopters, providing capability against fixed and rotary wing aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, anti-ship cruise missiles in flight, both over sea and land, and terminal ballistic missile defense. Now, that's amazing that it can also take out ballistic missiles. But what we're talking about, or at least what the video I'm just about to show you a bit of is concerned with, is not shooting down drones and cruise missiles and even ballistic missiles, but actually having something that can better take out Russian aircraft that are dropping these guided glide bombs. At the moment, there is no answer to the guided glide bombs, and Ukraine are less than willing to bring their Patriot air defense systems too far forward. They did that previously, took out a bunch of airplanes, but then they lost a couple of launches. And these missiles could be exceptionally useful. Now, they can be fired from platforms on sort of containers which have a launcher that come out of them that you can whack on ships, and I presume they could be operated just from the ground, but there's also talk about them being adapted to airplanes as well, if I'm correct. And yeah, they have a much greater operational range, so 240 kilometers or upwards of 460 kilometers, around 500 kilometers against land targets. So it depends, I guess what variant, Mach 3.5. So these things can shift. Okay, and that's really important for being able to hit airplanes, because apparently what airplanes can do is, even if they are in range, if they know that there's a missile coming at them, they can just dogleg it and get out of dodge. And air defense missiles are less than effective at taking them down. When something like this goes fast enough to be able to take these planes out of the sky. Right, you've got this HM Experience video or channel that has talked about this at length. You can go and watch him talk about this for half an hour. I'm just going to just dip into part of this. It's an expensive piece of kit, but if you use it against airplanes, or the missile is expensive, you use it against airplanes and helicopters, then it is well worthwhile.
Want to bring this to the attention of everybody who are involved in this Ukraine war, because Ukraine absolutely needs this weapon because it can stop these glider bombs. You can also see it's quite expensive missile. It costs $5 million for each of these missiles. That means it will cost $50 billion to build 10,000 of them. I'd say NATO needs 10,000 of them. They are quite pricey, these missiles, but you have to consider what they can do. They can shoot down a Russian helicopter that will cost at least $20 million for the Russians, or it can shoot down an aircraft that will cost at least $80 million for Russia. But you should not use these missiles to shoot down Russian Shaheeds or even their cruise missiles because it's simply too expensive for that. But definitely aircraft, that's what it should be shooting down. And also the range of this weapon is what makes them truly special. They have 370 kilometers range. And if you look at the Patriot missiles, they are right up here. The longest range Patriot missile in production is this Skyceptor, which has 180 kilometers range. That's not enough to down the Russian aircraft that are dropping glider bomb, and I can actually show that right away. Now here we have this map of Ukraine. Let's zoom a little bit out. Here we have the Black Sea. We have the red areas here are those areas of Ukraine that Russia is occupying. What I've done here is that I've taken the range of this longest range Patriot missile, that's 180 kilometers, and then I have made some circles here with that radius, that range. And I have placed these circles about 100 kilometers away from the front line because Russia has some drones that have a range up to about 80-90 kilometers. That's the biggest FPV or first-person viewer drones they have, meaning that there's an operator on Russian-controlled territory that are looking in some Googles, and then they can see what this drone can see. And they're flying around here hunting for targets. And you don't want to lose your Patriot rocket launchers, or you don't want to lose this Tycoon launcher that can launch these missiles because they're very expensive, and also the missiles are very expensive. And that's why you put them 100 kilometers behind the enemy lines. That means they are out of harm's way of 99% of all the weapons that Russia will have. They really need to be lucky to find one of these and then send a ballistic missile to hit a launcher if it's further away from there. So you put these launchers 100 kilometers behind enemy lines, and when they actually reach the front line, then they can only fly for 80 more kilometers. But the Russian airplanes can drop their glider bombs from 70 kilometers from the front line. And if they are warned by a radar airplane that Russia have and that is flying down here in Rostov, they have a radar airplane called the A-50, I have it in my weapons table, that can actually see whatever rockets that are fired from this area here. And they can warn their own fighter jets, oh, now a rocket is coming in for you. You have to turn around immediately and fly away from it. And because these fighter jets are flying pretty fast, they are actually able to escape being shot down from these Patriot missiles if they just turn around immediately and fly the opposite direction. So you can see all along the front line, they just don't have the range, these Patriot missiles. But I have another map. Here in this map, I have plotted in this SM-6 missile with a range of 370 kilometers, and I've plotted it in for 3 locations in Ukraine that are all 100 kilometers away from the front line, so they are at safe distance from being destroyed by Russia. And as you can see, their range is way into Russian-controlled territory, much beyond the 70 kilometers that the Russian aircraft need of distance when they drop their glider bombs. And that means they will all be shot down by this missile. Even if they are warned that now there's an incoming missile for them, they have to turn around and fly the other way. Well, they will have to fly 200 kilometers the other way in order to get out of range of this missile, and it's coming in much faster than this airplane can fly, so it will catch up to them quickly. And let me show you that. So here we are back in the table.
And he goes on to talk about that, but you get the point. So this you can go and check him out. HM Experience talking about this RIM 174, but this sounds like a great weapon for Ukraine to have. And yeah, it's just frustrating that 2.5 years later, we're still wondering how Ukraine can shoot Russian planes from out of the sky. It is so frustrating. Right, the Swedish provided Panzerbandvagn 302 that we know is on the way to Ukraine. We've seen them on the train in Czechia, at least some of them on the way to Ukraine. There's thought to be about 200 of these going to Ukraine. They look a bit similar to the M113, but I think they are basically better than that. They are newer, as in they have been made for a long time, but they've been consistently updated, and they were last sort of used in 2014 by the Swedes. Anyway, somebody threw in a comment to the thread, Per Leusberg, thank you very much for this, said, I thought for a while whether to comment on this, as I don't feel I have too much to add, but perhaps I do. 30 years ago, I served as a soldier. Panzer in a PBV-302 during my military service. So, with somewhat mixed feelings, I see these vehicles heading to Ukraine. However, my feelings are mostly positive. First, I was a bit surprised by the number of PBV-302s available. I thought they'd long been scrapped or recycled. It was a pleasant surprise to find that there were still so many left. It also feels good to know that instead of just sitting around somewhere gathering dust, they might be put to good use. I find it depressing to see images of thousands of tanks and combat vehicles rusting away in a desert when the need for them is so great elsewhere. And he's referencing those sort of Bradleys and Abrams sitting in the desert in the US. So the question is, will they be of any help? I reached out to a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while who had served as a UN soldier in Bosnia operating this very vehicle. Based on his experience, a PBV-302 is much better than people generally think. Of course, compared to the CV-9040 or 9035, they're old, so that's the new infantry fighting vehicle coming from, again, Sweden, combat vehicle 9040. Supposed to be many people think it's the best infantry fighting vehicle in the world. Of course, these are older. These are what have been replaced. So they're old, but they're still armoured vehicles, not just large cars. The crew, compared to those in other vehicles on the front line, will be well protected. At the very least, they could serve as excellent ambulances. Every PBV-302 can easily be converted into a medical transport vehicle by mounting a few stretchers, transforming it into an armoured ambulance, which is valuable in itself. So that's often what we see M113s being used as. After talking with my friend, we concluded that the Russian military's equipment situation in Ukraine is likely so poor that the PBV-302 could still be used for its original purpose, especially when attacking poorly protected Russian infantry. It's also important to remember that each PBV-302 should be accompanied by a well-trained, well-equipped anti-tank team, think Javelins and NLAWs, consisting of determined Ukrainians who practically live in their vehicle. I believe the PBV-302 could become a potent weapon in the Ukrainian arsenal. Simply using it as a taxi would probably be a waste of its potential. That's excellent. Thanks for that. It's always great to have this varied experience in the thread of people that have all this sort of different expertise in certain areas. So thank you very much, Per, for that. Right, we have an article in the Financial Times about Ukraine weighing up lifting its arms export ban to in a bid to scale up drone industry. So, from the beginning of the war, they banned export of particularly military equipment because obviously they need everything they can get. So, put a blanket ban, which means that some entity can't be on the side selling stuff abroad when that stuff, because they get more of a profit, when that stuff is needed more urgently inside Ukraine. But they're thinking of lifting that. So drone exports could bring in Ukraine up to $20 billion of revenue. Quote, just the money that we lack, said Alexander Marikovsky, head of Ukrainian Parliament's Economic Subcommittee, looking at how drone exports will be regulated. Since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, Kyiv has banned the export of military goods as it seeks to ensure its army gets all the supplies it needs. But the Ukrainian government lacks the financial resources to purchase all the available drones, let alone invest in further research and development. And allowing companies to export their excess production, and of course that's where the argument's going to lie. What is excess production? How can you prove it? So anyway, is now widely seen as a way of attracting investors. Moscow, meanwhile, significantly stepped up its arms manufacturing, with Ukrainian industry participants putting Russia's battlefield drone advantage at between 5 and 10 to 1. I don't know I mean, there's so many different claims about who can produce what, and the claims are that Ukraine is on to produce 4 million drones this next year. And if that's the case, then is it true that Russia would be making somewhere between 20 and 40 million drones? I completely doubt it. So I really doubt the statistics that we often hear from people suggesting that Russia is outproducing Ukraine in terms of drones. And remember, that's just drone manufacture. We're not talking about procurement from other countries as well for Ukraine. So the claim from Dmytro Kasapov is head of Ukspec Systems, is that Ukrainian troops have a colossal shortage of drones, and yet from other sources we're hearing that they are operating more drones than the Russians. But that could still mean there's a shortage. I mean, it's kind of an abstract idea, isn't it? Well, yeah, you've got you're receiving, like, one company I reported the other day is producing 100,000 a month. So one company is providing front lines with 3,300 drones every single day. But you can look at that and go, well, it's still not enough. You need 20 times more than that. So I think you're always going to hear the claim that you have a colossal shortage of drones, Ukrainians. But compared to where they were and where they are at now, I mean, I think it's phenomenal. But there you go. So Kasapov said his company was not receiving enough state contracts for its production capacity. Quote, the state does not have the means to buy it. So there is, and we've heard this from Kamishin, that there's a $10 billion shortfall. There's the production capacity, but there's just not the money to buy that stuff for their own Ukrainian army. So it could be that actually, well, part of what Ukraine is doing is trying to get money to get invested either directly from international partners into its own military industry, or just get money in order to invest themselves in their own industry and procure that stuff. Now, when we go back to Hungary saying, oh, you know, that 35 billion euros you were going to get, yeah, you're not going to get that till after the election. Like, this is really frustrating because you've got people able to build stuff to supply the Ukrainians with kit, not being able to do that. So these guys are then going to say, well, look, if we've got that capacity, surely we can take in some contracts from abroad. Ukraine is clearly going to be a world leader in drone R&D and production, given what they've had to do and how they're adapting to battlefield needs. So let's make some money by exporting stuff, which will maybe put us in a better position to be able to use that money to provide more stuff to our own forces. So it may sound counterproductive to begin with, but yeah. Biggest problem for every Ukrainian company is research and development, said the company's representative, who declined to give their name for fear of being targeted by Russia. When choosing the best cameras to fit their devices, for example, Roboniers had to cover the cost of all the other lenses they tried. The industry's hope is that lifting the exports ban will prompt Western partners to allocate aid to Ukrainian manufacturers. Several partners pledged money to buy drones for the Ukrainian army made locally, but the programs are still in their infancy. Yes, so on and so forth. So a really interesting article there, well worth looking into. Aside from investment, manufacturers say they are desperate for more standardization and planning by the government. Dozens of different types of drones acquired by the Ukrainian forces are all operating on different software, said Yuri Kazianov, a leading drone expert and commander who described the situation as a zoo of drones. And I've said previously that this has been an advantage, but as with everything in life, there's a sweet spot, there's an equilibrium. So the more drones you produce, the more kind of individual innovation from all these different companies, then it means you're going to have bespoke drones that can do certain things that other drones can't, but that drone can do this. And you can have just a greater competition, which is good for driving innovation and driving costs down. So using the free market to aid you there. But the flip side is you then get so much competition that you've got such a variety of drones that it's like a zoo. You don't know. You get a drone sent to you as a frontline drone operator, and you're like, oh, this is using a completely different operating system. I don't know how to use it. So then you have to train yourself up on that, and then you're losing efficiency, etc., etc. So there is going to be a sweet spot whereby the government needs to standardize certain aspects of the drone or certain aspects of drones. So dozens of different types of drones acquired by the Ukrainian forces are all operating on different software. A zoo of drones. Artem Kolesnik, the chief technology officer at Reactive Drone, a manufacturing company, said his sector also needed the type of policy direction that other types of weapons producers received. Quote, we do not currently have a program that prepares qualified engineers in universities, Kolesnik pointed out. We need to look at what we need in 5-10 years. If you don't look, then this whole drone industry will die or be bought out by someone. And we heard yesterday about those two women who are trying to put training things into the curriculum in schools, trying to get kids learning to operate drones. But it's about making it the whole process more formalized and embedded in the education system right through university. So there is some kind of sustainability after the end of the war for the industry. Interesting. Right, North Korea is likely already sending its military to Ukraine to assist Russia, according to South Korea's Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun. Quote, "We believe there have been injuries and fatalities among North Korean troops in Ukraine," he said, and this is probably in response to 6 North Koreans supposedly dying in a missile strike the other day. And interestingly, they were, it appears, being trained by the Russians, not the other way around. So we had previously Iranians who had, I think, perished at nearer the beginning of the war when they were starting to receive these Shahid drones, Shahid 131 and 136. The Russians were getting training from Iranians on how to use them and then how to fire them. So there were a couple of times, I think, when Shahid launch sites were struck by Ukrainians and Iranians had perished then. It appears to be the other way around, where North Koreans are getting training from the Russians, but on or near the front lines in the war zone, and they have perished as a result. This very close relationship between North Korea and Russia is definitely problematic. Right, Telegraph reporting here that good news on the war with Russia. Su-57 Felon, the 5G stealth fighter production, it has been crippled in Russia. That's written by David Axe. He normally writes for Forbes, actually. Anyway, in Russia, production of the Sukhoi Su-57 stealth fighter, that's a 5th generation 5G, 5th generation fighter, has stalled. It's clear that Russia's military industry heavily depends on Western components, particularly in electronics, says the Daily Telegraph. Now, we know that there are loopholes. They're able to get certain things, but there are obviously things that they can't get hold of. And when you're talking about the most complex pieces of kit, like a 5th generation fighter, a stealth fighter, then it's less likely you're going to be able to get hold of some of those very key components. Sanctions put into place by Western governments have throttled the supply of this critical hardware. As a result, production of the Su-57 is in jeopardy. We haven't really seen this being used. We saw the Okhotnik S-70 drone, stealth drone, being shot down the other day, supposedly by Su-57. And we've heard 1 or 2 other instances where they have been used, potentially, but essentially they haven't been used. And there are lots of theories going around that they're just not very good. It's a bit like the T-14. Why is the T-14 Armata tank not used? Because it's mainly in prototype, and it's still mainly in prototype because it's just crap. And it's not very good. And that's why you haven't seen it on the front line. But B, it might be because being relatively new, there aren't as many pilots trained on it, or there isn't the logistics footprint needed for it because it's not as established as some of these older fighters and whatnot. Does it have the use? I mean, is it a fighter bomber? Maybe it's just not what's needed at the moment in the airspaces above occupied Ukraine, so on and so forth. The reality is that this has been absent from use, the Su-57, and now we're hearing that actually it may even be stalled in terms of being manufactured, and then that's going to probably reflect issues with logistics and maintenance as well, and that there's another reason not to use it. Okay, and we're going to go back. I did a breaking news update last night on Bob Woodward's new book, War, which has been sending ripples around the political spaces, predominantly because, one, Trump has gifted COVID testing machines directly to Vladimir Putin, the dictator leader of Russia. And that was controversial. Supposedly he made 7 telephone calls after being president, so not while in office, to Vladimir Putin, which arguably contravenes the Logan Act, so he shouldn't be able to do that. But other interesting things as well, like Biden, apparently there was someone inside the Kremlin that had given the Americans the plans for the attack, and that's why the Americans knew the Russians were going to attack at the beginning of the war. I know we knew the Americans knew this, but what we didn't know is that it came from a human intelligence source, and that arguably the plans were passed to the Americans. So that's really fascinating. We've heard Bibi Netanyahu Joe Biden as president, F and Jeff against Putin, calling him the epitome of evil, exactly the right kind of rhetoric in my books, and also about Netanyahu, so he doesn't get on with Netanyahu, which we knew anyway. So interesting transcripts of conversations, or telephone conversations and other conversations involving all of these people. As Marco Mikkelsen here says, Woodward's new book makes an important suggestion as to why the Biden administration has been so restrictive and cautious in supporting Ukraine's victory strategy. The answer, and we kind of know this anyway, but it's interesting to see this come through from all of these sources that he has been able to access in the White House and beyond, that Russia has succeeded in seriously scaring the Americans with nuclear blackmail. So, yeah, fascinating. In fact, although I'll go into this in more depth in the geopolitics video, that this is important with regard to the US inability to lift restrictions, or not wanting to lift restrictions. And it is, I would say, it is going to be a case of escalation, of escalation management, not that, as they have said at other points, there's only 10% of the aircraft are left there, or we're giving them this, or we're doing that, or they don't need to do this, or whatever reason we hear coming from the Pentagon. That's just BS. It is about escalation management. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use, of interest to you. Let me know if it was or wasn't. Thank you so much for all of your support. Take care, everybody, and I will speak to you soon.